Imagine if you had an assistant managing your orders, logistics, and updates while you focused on design and clients. Well, my friend, that is Design Trade Service. With exclusive designer net pricing and unparalleled customer service, they turn hassle into harmony. No fees, no fuss, just excellence. Discover the DTS difference today. Go to designtradeservice.com/LuAnn to sign up free and to learn more. Welcome to A Well-Designed Business. My name is LuAnn Nigara, and I'm so glad you found this podcast. Together with my husband Vince and our partner Bill, we have grown our company WindowWorks from the ground up. So I know and I understand the challenges you face in running your interior design business. I also know that your talent alone isn't enough to ensure your success. So on this podcast, we talk about strategies and practical steps to help you grow your business. But make no mistake about it, we have our share of fun here too, mixed in with those aha moments that I love so much. This isn't fluff. Nobody has time for that. Whether you are a new interior designer or a seasoned designer, I am here to help you create and to manage the kind of interior design firm that you dream of. It's straight talk and it's action. Are you ready? Let's get started. Hi, welcome to A Well-Designed Business. Before we get into today's episode, I want to let you know that we're doing something a little different over the next several months. We're bringing back the most downloaded, the most talked about episodes from the last 9 years of A Well-Designed Business. These are the episodes that built businesses, that sparked aha moments, that turned you into an action taker. Now, if you're wondering why we're revisiting these episodes and what's changing with the show overall, well, I walk you through the full vision in our April 25th, 2025 episode titled The Big Shift, What's Changing on a Well-Designed Business and Why. That episode is linked for you in the show notes. Now, a quick heads up. These episodes are airing as they originally did. That means the music might sound familiar or it might be vintage. That means the event dates will definitely be out of date that I talk about. And it also means that any offers that are mentioned may or may not be valid still. But the insights, still golden. So whether it's your first time hearing this episode or your fifth time hearing it, there's something in this conversation for you right now in this season of your business. So here's the show. I hope you enjoy it. Hi, everybody. Welcome again to another episode of A Well-Designed Business. Thank you so much for tuning into the podcast. On the show today is Stacy Garcia. Stacy is an established leader in the world of design. She is a successful creative entrepreneur and founder of multiple business enterprises, including Libatex, a textile supplier, and Stacy Garcia Inc., a licensing firm and design house. Her brands include Stacy Garcia Commercial, Stacy Garcia New York, and Stay by Stacy Garcia. Stacy is an internationally renowned designer, and she is a forecasting expert. She has partnered with some of the world's leading manufacturers to create products that go from floor to ceiling, including textiles, wall covering, furniture, carpet, and accessories. Stacy serves as a chairholder of the Color Marketing Group, and she is a member of Pratt & Lambert's Style and Design Guild. In today's show, you will easily see how and why Stacy was voted one of the 10 leading voices in the hospitality design industry and why she was honored by ASID for design excellence. Her work has been featured in interior design, boutique design, New York Spaces, Luxe, Rue Daily, and Architectural Digest. I can't wait for you to meet Stacy, and I'm so proud to say that she is yet another remarkable business person who has so generously shared her time with us. And as soon as I tell you about Cravit Inc., our podcast sponsor, I'll be right back to introduce you. I'm so proud to say that our podcast is sponsored by Cravit Inc., featuring curated Cravit.com. You know, I've been a Cravit customer since 1984, and I just can't say enough great things about Cravit Inc., and now there's curated Cravit.com. At curatedcravit.com, they work so hard to source high-quality items for you and your clients. And they really do make it easy for you to find that unique piece to complete your interior design projects. You know what my favorite part is? It's trade only. That's right. They got your back at Kravet Inc. Visit curatedkravet.com today. Hi, Stacy. Thanks so much for joining me on A Well-Designed Business today.
Hi, LuAnn. Thanks so much for having me.
Yes, I'm very excited because you're my first guest who has a specialty in hospitality as opposed to residential design. And of course, it's much more than just a tiny specialty in hospitality, as all of your colleagues are going to learn in a few minutes as we discuss everything with you. You have a very big platform. You have a very big company. You're doing lots of things. I'm not even going to preview it because there's so many things to share about it. So, but what I'd like you to do is I know that your first company that you started was Libatex, and I love that you named it after your great grandma. And I would like for you to explain to us the beginning of that company. It's a textile company. It's a textile converting company. So share with us about that company and the very beginning of your career.
Sure, I would love to. So, as you said, it was named after my great-grandma Liba, and I actually incorporated that business in 1999 and, sort of spent the better part of a year doing research, learning about the textile supply world and really thinking about what I wanted to do with this company. And at the time, I had experience, so my background actually, and I'll back it up a little more for you and for the listeners, but I actually studied surface pattern design, which was a major. I have a formal degree in something called surface pattern design from Syracuse University. And we learned how to do what it says, patterns, everything from tiles to carpet to fabrics, wallpapers, anything really that would be put into repeat, from gift wrap to dinnerware. So it was this really niche area of study. And from that, I had been really fortunate to be given the opportunity to work at Ralph Lauren and learn kind of the secret behind that, the mastery behind that magical brand and how that was done behind the scenes. And so, it was sort of percolating on business and what that would be like. And I launched Libatex really thinking, it would give me more flexibility. It would give me more time. I was going to have control.
Wait, being self-employed was going to give you more?
Right, exactly. I think I was totally, young and delusional at that point.
That's so sweet. Isn't that a sweet thought?
I know. Yeah, so I have this great idea. I'm going to go off on my own, and then I'm going to, have more time, which is exactly the opposite.
I'm not going to be at 11 o'clock at night still working. No.
There was a joke in my house where my husband, at the time, we were still using fax machines, right?
Yeah.
So be like, where's Stacy? Oh, she's checking the fax again. It was like really, a sickness at that point. And, when I launched, I was actually employed by another company in the textile world. And I was hired by them to design all the products for their hospitality division. And I originally had no idea what that even meant. What is the hospitality world? What is that division all about? And we were designing for hotels. And it was my first experience really working with the interior design community, putting my expertise as a pattern designer and textile designer together with their expertise and their creativity to create all of these specialty products that were going to go into hotels. And when I took that job, it was like, it was like fireworks went off. It was amazing to see the colors and the patterns and this sort of awesome design that was being done, because the people who were staying at hotels were only going to experience it, for a week on vacation. Oh. And so you take all of these risks with design that you couldn't take designing residential in the hotel arena. So that was super fun.
Yeah, that's true, because you do appreciate that as a guest in a hotel, that it is bigger than life and that it feels like an extraordinary experience as opposed to, it's like my house at home. That's very, I have these little things where it's so obvious, and then when I hear it, it's like, oh yeah.
Right, exactly.
So that's cool. I like that. I like that a lot. And that excited you because, like you said, the colors and the patterns were all like, whoa, anything you can imagine you can do, right?
Yeah, anything you can imagine you can do. And, at the time, I mean, trends come and go, in all industries, but at the time, it was a heavy trend towards sort of themed resorts and, tropical destinations and really all kinds of crazy stuff was happening in the marketplace. It was just so fun. And interestingly, just sort of bringing it back to, when I started the company and how I started, um, we used to not only develop product from scratch in the studio where I worked, but we also had the opportunity to buy vintage documents for inspiration and art from different studios for inspiration. And I have this, kind of aha thing that had happened to me. So I had been working at the company for probably 4 years, living in the city, and I had saved up a couple bucks, and was getting married and beginning my life, and not that much because I was still a young person, and we had met with this dealer who used to sell vintage wallpapers and vintage fabrics to the studio that I was working at. And like I said, we used as an inspiration. And I picked a bunch of pieces, maybe 4 or 5 pieces that I thought were just amazing, that would just be such great beginnings to a new collection for the hospitality collection that I was working on. And I pulled my two bosses, into the studio, and I said, all right, I need you to take a look at this. I feel really good about this artwork or, these vintage documents, and that we would use it as a jumping off point and create, these cool new things. Mm-hmm. And they both sort of said, yeah, we don't see it. And it was okay. I heard no, you get used to hearing no, or they don't buy into your vision or whatever it is. Right. And I said to them, okay, that's cool. No problem. I'll keep looking, or we'll develop other ideas for you. And so they left, they went back to their offices, and for whatever reason, there was this little voice that was nagging in my head that said,
I love the voice.
Yeah. The voice said, go buy the pieces. And I went to the gentleman, that were selling to the company I was working for. And I said, I don't know if you're comfortable with this or not. Obviously my bosses aren't interested in these pieces for this company, but I would really like to offer to buy those pieces personally. I have a vision for them. I would love to buy those. Would you take a personal check? And sort of,
could I crack my piggy bank here on the counter, please?
Correct, right? Can I count my quarters? Would you take a personal check? And with basically, all the savings that I was able to scrape together.
And so much for the wedding plans, right?
Exactly. I wrote out a check. It was sort of this leap of faith, this sort of message that I was ready and I was willing to invest. And
I love that. That's the goddess voice,
It is.
It is. I tell my kids all the time. I'm like, what does your goddess say? Don't ignore the goddess. She knows.
I love that. Yeah. We'll have to talk more about the goddess. You'll have to teach me. But yeah, it was like, I listened to the voice, and the voice said, grab these pieces because you're gonna start your own collection. Like, you have a vision. You have the creativity to design interesting things that other people maybe don't understand until you've done it. Once you sort of bring it out into the market and make it yours, then people will understand it. Because I really believed in the vision of these pieces. And ultimately, those became, the beginnings of what my first collection would be for Libatex.
Now, Stacy, there's multiple things in here that I'm just enthralled about. Number one, I love, love, love anytime somebody has their voice speaking to them, and no matter how, outrageous it is, they act on it. And what I mean by that very specifically is not acting on outrageous thoughts, but acting on a true inner voice thought and looking at that inner voice thought and even saying that's a little far-fetched, but when you know it, you know it. And I'm huge on that. Okay. So I, applaud you for being a young woman and hearing the voice and jumping. Okay. So hats off.
Thank you.
Yeah. 110%. Totally believe that. But here's my question, and this might be my lack of knowledge in the topic that you're talking about. Explain to me, I get that there's a product, a vintage product that, whatever it is, the textile or whatever it is that, is serving as your inspiration. But what I don't get, and I'm probably naive, why did you need to buy it in order for that to be yours to use as your inspiration? In other words, I mean, I get that there was no cell phone that you could take a picture, and that's probably not even appropriate license-wise or copy, whatever those laws would be. But
Right.
why do you need to own it? Like, what's the technical reason for that?
So you have a point. I mean, technically, if you're going to, just use it purely as inspiration and then really create a totally new piece of it, you don't. You don't really technically need to own it. But for me, part of my process was almost connecting on a visceral level with these pieces. And so, we do have a really beautiful vintage archive. And some of them we use and some of them we just, hang for, they sort of just emanate energy almost, for lack of a better way of putting it. But if you are going to use elements of the piece, it's also better to own the piece so that if somebody else, if the copyrights have expired, if they're over 100 years old and they haven't been recopyrighted by the trust or whoever owns the pieces, then, things that are in the public domain, it's always good to show where you've taken those elements from. And having a piece would show that, like, you didn't take it from somebody else, but you've referenced the piece that you own.
I
So
see.
there's that. But really, we're doing less and less of that today, and more of, just sort of feeling that the energy of the piece, and so the original pieces that I bought, were old and were sort of reminiscent, and they were from the 30s and 40s, but they just had this fabulous tropical flair to them. And, you can't do justice from a picture. Sometimes you really do need, to touch and feel and experience the original.
Well, and it's obviously sounds like you said, visceral for you. It's a very organic, artistic process, and you're getting, and you use the same word. I'm repeating you. You use the same word, energy. You're getting energy from it, but when you answered my question, I understand it. It's almost like if you wanted to use some music in a commercial, if there's a production company, if you have to buy the rights to it in order to even use X amount of bars of that music. And so that's what you're explaining to me, is that if you want to build on it and incorporate the original some sort of aspect of it, it needs to be your proprietary property in order to do that. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. That's really cool. And so what happens when you come back? You come back, is it your parents or your advisors at that point, your husband to be, and you say, this is what I
Yeah, it was the husband to be, and I went, I'm sorry that I spent all of our savings, but here's what I did. I mean, I don't think I called him. We were engaged, we were planning a wedding, and I 100% did not think to call him. God bless him that we're still married 18 years,
Yeah.
So it is pretty miraculous that there was a very high level of trust, and here's what I did and here's what I'm thinking about. And it didn't turn in, it wasn't like overnight, it didn't overnight turn into this thing. It was sort of like they kind of ruminated, it was almost more of the symbol. And once I did that, that was sort of the kick to let me start to research. And so, just organically, almost certain things, I started taking small steps. I hadn't even incorporated yet. I didn't have a corporate entity. Like I said, I wrote these out of my personal account. I probably should deduct that expense at some point because trust me, that was not a tax write-off at the time.
Right. That's a legit thing.
It was, I know. But it was really a leap of faith to say, I'm committed to this, and I believe in myself to the point that I'm willing to invest my dollars into that belief, and I'm willing to begin to take steps to make that belief a reality.
Yeah, and it was like a symbol of that belief, just making, because here's the thing, somebody else could have approached it more logically. And said, those things are going to be sitting there and they're not exactly on the shelf at, going to fly off the shelf. It's probably available. It's a small market. It's a small market that's going to purchase those things. So somebody else could have said, oh, maybe I should buy it myself. Let me go back. Let me think. Let me ask 20 people. Let me research the place. And 6 months later say, okay, yes, I have a viable plan. And let me, now go back and buy these things. And by the way, I'm a big fan of all of that too. Let's be real. You know what I mean? Like there's a lot of times that you do actually have to do all of that back end work to prove to yourself, your accountant, your everybody that this is going to be a marketable, viable, profitable business. So I'm not saying, hey, everybody just go out and spend all your money on your latest idea. But when you know it, that's so awesome that you did it, and you just that's it. I'm doing this and this is where we're going. And good for you, girlfriend.
Yeah, no, it's amazing. I mean, the other flip side to that story, it's interesting how, like we said, the universe puts people in your path, or, it sends you messages through these little voices. But I ended up becoming really good friends with the people who I bought these documents from. And, I mean, to the point that I named my daughter after one of them.
Wow.
So, sometimes, people are meant to be more than business associates in your life.
Yeah.
And I feel so fortunate in the industry that we're in, to have met people who really have become, beyond friends to me at this point. They really are like family to me.
Right.
And so many of them I would never have known. I would have never been introduced to them if it wasn't for the design industry. I mean, they're just the most generous people.
That's nice. That's very nice. And I have a question for you. So I'm curious, from the time you buy that, make that purchase, is it, because, like we said, we're glossing over all of the hard work that went in between. But so in reality, from then to the first collection that's launched, that's based on these purchases and these inspirations, is it 6 months? Is it 1 year? Is it 2 years? What's that arc like?
Yeah, that's a good question. It's probably more like 2 years.
Okay.
It's probably more like 2 years.
Any chance your previous employers saw that collection and was like, oh, that was a good idea?
I've joked with my husband where I say, God bless them. So the arc to that story is, over the 2 years from the time I purchased that art, we got married. We bought our first townhouse. And I got pregnant with my first child. So this was like bang, bang, bang. A lot happened in a really short period of time. I don't know why I was in a rush, but, we seemed to be, here's what we're going to do. And so I guess by the time I was 26, it was, all of these things had already begun to happen.
Wow.
For me. And so I ended up in that time frame, doing the research, learning how to incorporate a business, and beginning to take classes. So it was interesting. I mean, I have this memory of being very pregnant with my son, still working in the city for the company, that I was employed by, and then signing myself up for classes at FIT for not to get a degree, but in sort of continuing education.
Uh-huh.
And one of the classes I took was called Going Indie. Like, I knew that there was a lot I didn't know. So I researched, and I stumbled on this class that had a textbook and started to lay out, the difference between a sole proprietorship and an S Corp, and just even how do you launch?
Right.
So, those were things that I just started to educate myself on before I hired an accountant, because I didn't have that much money to be able to do, bring on a lawyer and bring on an accountant, that doesn't exist when you're just starting up.
No,
so
it doesn't.
There was a lot that I had to be self-taught, and I was willing to do the work, and so those were the things that kind of happened in betwixt and in between. And then I started playing with these the collection, what would ultimately become the first collection, so that was part of what happened, and had planned to go back almost, it was sort of sending mixed messages to the universe at that point, going like, well, maybe I'll have the baby and go back to work, because I had the burden of a mortgage. We got into this townhouse so that he didn't have to live in a dresser drawer in Manhattan, and because that was about what we could afford. We were in this 3-story walk up, and, it was kind of a 1-bedroom, but it was a makeshift 1-bedroom, and, it wasn't glamorous, but it worked. But we had to live somewhere with him, and we had that. And then the side story to the story, just to feel the pain, was I had a husband who absolutely hated his job. He was an accountant who was working, if you were in the New York area, you know what Rikers Island is. But he had taken a job. He was in healthcare accounting and had taken this job to, be sort of the auditor through the healthcare system that managed the healthcare for the inmates on Rikers Island. And he is this gentle man who would drive into work and they'd have to like check under his car every day that he would leave, that nobody was hanging onto the bottom of it. And he said he would just hear the screaming and it was just like killing him.
Yeah. His spirit. He couldn't his
killing
spirit.
his spirit. It was so bad for him. And so
it takes a special, not that your husband's not special, but I don't mean special by, but there are people that they're destined and they're good at that. And that's the people that should do that.
And that's a calling. And truly, I mean, God bless those people because it does take a very special person to be able to do that, understand how important that job is, and be able to leave it behind and still be psychologically, and emotionally whole. Like that you can leave that and then go and, do your thing.
But it's okay if you're not that person and be okay with leaving it. Right.
So poorly suited for him. And so I had said to him, I know we have a mortgage and I know I'm pregnant, but you need to quit the job because I can't lose you, because it's so unhealthy. And so here we were, I was on maternity leave, basically giving him the go ahead to quit. So he had no income. We had a mortgage and I looked at him and I said, I what I might do is I might go back freelance. I think that was the mixed message to the universe. I really don't want to go back full time, leave the baby 5 days a week. Let me see if they'll bring me on as a freelancer. And I went, met with the accounting department, the CFO of the company I was working for. And I said to him, I'm ready to come back from maternity leave. But I really can't come back 5 days a week. Would you accept me as a freelance person and pay me the rate that you were paying the freelancers? And, which at the time I think was, I don't know, $50 an hour or something. And he said, no, I'm not going to do that. I'm not renegotiating your salary. I'll just pay you whatever your hourly rate, is. Which was a lot less than $50 an hour. So I remember being so upset, and just so.
Well, I'm thinking, did you then not do it then? Did you walk away at that point?
I didn't. I said to him, well, I can't accept it. I'll hire my replacement and I'll train my replacement. I wouldn't leave anybody in a lurch. So let me get you situated here. And, but unfortunately, we can't continue on. And I said, well, what a gift.
I was hoping that's where you were going to go.
What a gift.
Yeah. It's like, what's that one line they say, be careful, not be careful what you pray for, but when you're praying for something or putting something in the universe that you want, you sometimes don't think you got it, but you did get it. Like, you know what I mean? Yeah. Like as you're telling that story, I'm thinking she's going to say he said no and she walked away. And I'm going to be like, yes.
And I felt so defeated. I mean,
yes, in that moment, you're crushed because this was your goal at that moment. But whether it was a week, a day, a month, or a year later, you realize that was the gift of that moment. Because if he had said yes and you went on for $50 an hour, it would have been like a ton of money at that level, but it would have only ever been that level of money.
The end. I probably would still be freelancing there.
Yeah, like you'd be like, okay, this is great. We're, got everything set. Instead, you were destined to go on to create this amazing company.
Absolutely. And there was 100% a reason. I mean, at the time, I'm sure I was in a panic. I had a mortgage. I had a husband who quit his job and I had, just given birth.
Wait, and here's what I love. So 2 years before you come back and you say to your then fiance, I just spent my life savings on these pieces of art. Yeah. Oh, okay. And now it's 2 years later. Oh, you leave your job, honey. I need you to leave your job so that you're healthy. And guess what? I just quit mine too.
Right. Yeah. And I'm sure I said it to him with great confidence. Don't worry. I know what we pay the freelancers there. I'll just go back freelance. I'm going to increase my salary. I'll only be working 3 days a week. I got this.
Right.
I'm sure
but then they walk in the door and go, no, I quit again.
Yeah, exactly. No, he wouldn't honor. He said no. And I was so defeated. I mean, I remember coming home just defeated, just so upset about this, and, but yes, I mean, blessedly, that's what happened because forget it. It's been the ultimate gift.
You had to stand up. You had to stand up and do the next thing. And the next thing was what you were already supposed to have been doing. You were just checking yourself a little bit. You were not so sure.
Exactly. And I still see that competitor at all the trade shows. And, luckily I left it, on really good terms, and so they are friendly competitors at this point.
And that's also the same company that didn't want to make that original art purchase, correct? Right? Yeah.
Yeah, that
And
is the
so
same company.
did they ever see the line? And I mean, this is me just being, nosy now. This
Yeah,
isn't
yeah,
really,
yeah.
but I mean, did they ever see the line that was inspired from those pieces and recognize that, oh, that was a really successful line? Or was it just like years later and you didn't need to put it in their face that this is the line that you couldn't
Yeah,
visualize?
I don't know that they would have connected the dots to
Right.
that point,
Because it's
because
too
it
far
probably
along,
was
right?
2 years later, that it happened.
Yeah.
And certainly, who knows, if the CFO was ever, said to himself, gee, I should have given her the $50 an hour,
I'm sure that I'm
But
100% sure of. He's probably said 10 times in 10 years.
yeah, I'm also sure they do very well for themselves, that they're
Yeah.
not too worried what I'm doing. But what's been really nice is, over the course of years, like I said, because I maintained a lot of my friendships over there too. I've had some really nice conversations with many people at that company who have all said, like, good for you. I mean, I think there was a lot of cheerleading from the
Yeah.
sidelines, knowing that. And this is sort of another one of the theories that, I really do subscribe to. I didn't invent it, but I definitely buy into it. Just sort of the idea of the law of abundance. My success does not take away their success.
Absolutely.
And so there's
enough for everybody. That's what I always
there's
say. There's always
more
enough for
than
everybody.
enough. There's more than enough.
That's right.
And so, sort of having that, it's really, I've only been shown that, that there is really plenty for both of us. I haven't taken anything from them. And because I believe they subscribe to that theory too, they've been able to really be cheerleaders of mine,
Yeah.
which is so nice to feel like people are rooting for you.
It is. And especially when it's colleagues like that are actually aware of the day to day and what it goes into create and do the things that you do. And it's so much better when the atmosphere is like that when you're in those situations. It's like, good for you and we're all great. And, because it is true. I 100% agree with it that there's nothing. I just said to, who did I just say to? I think I said it on the podcast last week or something in a thing. Don't worry about giving away your best ideas. You know what I mean?
Right.
The more you share your best ideas and the things that you do and your expertise, yes, there's always going to be people that are like, oh, okay, now she taught me how to do it and I don't have to hire her to do it. But there's always people that will say, could you just do it for me? Like, you're better at it. Let me hire you to do it. So that's like the analogy for an interior designer. You know what I mean? But for you, it's the same thing, that you're happy that your competitors are doing good and you're not threatened or bothered by it because there's more than enough for everybody.
Absolutely.
Totally awesome way to live your life. I love it.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, all right. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to take a little break for our show sponsor, Cravat Inc. And then I'm going to be right back. And I want to ask you about your position in the industry as a trendsetter. Okay?
Sounds good.
All right. Our sponsor for today's episode is Cravat Inc., featuring CuratedCravat.com. CuratedCravat.com is a trade-only resource for all of your interior design needs, from furniture to accessories. Their platform is so comprehensive, offering the finest in furniture, floor covering, lighting, wall decor, bedding, and much more. Fabulous products that you won't find every day. With CuratedCravat.com, your business just got easier. The process is so simple and the results are unbeatable. Just design, click, and your items will be delivered right to you. You can also browse the many beautiful room designs which have been curated for you by esteemed interior designers such as Nate Berkus, Jonathan Adler, and Alexa Hampton, to name only a few. I use CuratedCravat.com for my clients, and I love the results. Remember, design, click, delivered with CuratedCravat.com by Cravat Inc. Okay, so Stace, here's the thing. I understand intellectually that you're a trendsetter. I get that, and I know the definition of it. But what I don't know is how do you actually be that? And I don't mean, because I want to learn to be it, because I know that it's not something I can learn. What I'm saying is, how do you know the difference between a fad and a trend? Like, how do you innately know that?
So great question. It's taken I want to say years of practice, years of study, which is true. The first I was really ever exposed to this was at a group called Color Marketing Group. And this also goes back, sort of early in my career when I was first working as the designer for this other company. And one of the first trade shows I was at, a woman who ended up becoming a mentor to me um, came over to our booth and said, "Hey, your booth looks great. Do you mind if I take a picture? I'm reporting back for Color Marketing Group." And I said to her, "Sure, you could take a picture, but what is Color Marketing Group?"
Mm.
And she said, "Oh, she kind of came over to me, put her arm around me and said, oh, you're new to this business. You could tell I was young. You need to look into this. Color Marketing Group is the premier international color forecasting association. And we're made up of designers from all different industries up and down the supply chain. And retailers are in the mix. Anybody who would be influencing color decision making can be part of this organization. So you apply to be part of it. And we get together once a year at a summit and we compare notes on what we're working on. So it's this very open dialogue that we have to see where directions are going, and really at the end attempt to validate trends that we're seeing in the marketplace. So this is really helpful. And I said, great. And I looked into that and I joined that organization and really informed a lot of my process in terms of how to spot a trend and what do you look for. And then I've taken that process and really evolved it in the course of the 20 plus years that I've been designing products as really part of how I do what I do in terms of working with manufacturers and designing, whether it's textiles for my collections for Libatex or furniture for the different companies I work with. I designed a line for Bernhardt Hospitality. I have a great new line through D-Style and Allen Copley, which we're cross-selling into residential. But where do the trends come from, right? So that's this great question.
Yeah.
And through the years, with the research I've done, what I found is that there are drivers of trends. There are things that really are sort of the undercurrent of what's making a trend happen. And they range, it can be anything from technology to the environment to politics that might be having an impact on where the trends are coming from. And then they trickle down, so there's this sort of undercurrent that's happening. And then the trends start to pop up in certain places first. It's almost like in technology, who's the early adopters? We look to consumers as the early adopters, and then you watch sort of how those trends evolve, who's going to pick up the technology.
Right.
But we're looking, at almost what are the early adopters of trends and where do we start to see them manifest first? And some of the areas that we're looking at are the art world, because really what are artists doing? Artists are telling a story that's sort of a glimpse into a slice of time, what's important to society at that slice of time. So you almost become like I call myself like a trend anthropologist almost. You look back in order to look forward. And so the art world is a great place to start seeing trends happening. What colors are they using? What mediums are they using? Is it graffiti art? Is it sculpture? And what are they saying about society today? And how is that resonating with people? Fashion is another great place to look at to see, what trends are happening at the high end. If you look at couture fashion,
Right.
what's inspiring them? What's happening? What's walking down the runway? What materials are they using? Is it highly covered up? Is it, that whole debate, is it above the knee or below the knee?
Right.
And what does that mean? What do those things mean? Because fashion also really is a reflection of a slice in time of our society, of what we need, what we want, what we're yearning for. So that's a great place to look as well. And of course, as we talked about, technology being a huge driver, where do those things show up? Well, look at how technology has influenced the media. You and I wouldn't be having this podcast right now if technology hadn't evolved. So we look at the media also as a place that drives trends. And when we talk media, it can be anything from the movies, to social media today, it really influencing buying decisions and consumer desires And ultimately, when I'm designing product, whether it's for hotels or interiors, or consulting, giving trend talks to buyers at retail level, we're all each individually consumers. And as consumers, we are influenced by all of these things. These things make a difference at a subconscious level, and they impact our buying decisions. So, that this sort of digging deeper beneath the surface of, well, here's the trend, here's what I spotted. Part of the process that I use in my studio and with the manufacturers we work for is really digging into the why, because that helps us validate whether or not it's a trend or a fad.
There's multiple things that come to mind when you go through all of those details. So, for instance, one relates to the fashion and the runways, and then the other relates to your exact process. And I put them both out there out loud, so if I forget one, you'll remind me what it was. The other one was.
Good, perfect.
But I think it's interesting because my stepson was a celebrity makeup artist, and he previously was the lead for the DVF runway shows for a couple of years. I mean, he was very, very successful. He switched careers now. Now he's an actor.
Oh, wow. Well, yeah. DVF is one of my favorites.
I know. So, and he is just the most talented makeup artist on the planet. You can't even imagine the career that he had. And he decided, you know what? Did that, been there, done that. I'm going to rock the world as an actor now. So it's very exciting for us to watch him achieve this too. But the thing is that I never did ask Matt this question, and I wonder now you're talking to it, is how, it does seem like when you watch the runway shows that all of a sudden there is a trend within the designers. So like you said, above the knee, below the knee, florals, whatever it is. And I just might, again, and I may be naive, and there might be everybody going, what a moron. Everybody knows this. But they don't all call each other, like DVF isn't calling Calvin the fall before saying, okay, let's all do floral. How do they? I know that they all don't do the same exact thing. If there's 20 designers, there's not 20, but there are trends in that. And I recognize one difference is you're actually ahead of that and you're figuring out a trend ahead of it. But just how does it all germinate at the same time? That doesn't make sense to me. I don't get that.
I mean, that's an interesting question. I think forecasting is a huge part of the process.
So there's people that are talking about it in forecasting, and then it's subliminally affecting all the people that design fashion, textiles, and everything. And they're like, oh, the forecast is for this. And then they all kind of sort of run that way. Is that what you mean?
There is. And I think what ends up happening, though, is, when you're doing it as long as I've been doing it or as long as some of these fashion houses have been doing it, even if their process isn't, we're going to employ forecasters, which many of them do.
Okay.
You do it long enough and you begin to feel it in your gut. You can read it before it's happening. It's almost like a psychic ability because you're doing it so often. And, a dry analogy for it would almost be somebody who's been a physician for 20 or 30 years. Your patient comes in, describes a couple symptoms. You're going to run the tests to back it up, but a good physician sort of knows, can sort of forecast, they can kind of make a guess of what's wrong with you based on what you're describing. In this instance, it's almost like, you can make that forecast of what's happening in the undercurrent based on what you're seeing, based on what you're feeling, based on how they evolve. And really that sort of loops it into the real core difference between a fad and a trend. So when you're looking at fashion, there are fads that happen. A fad is something that's going to come in really quick and go out really quick.
And they're okay with it. Sometimes they intend that too. That serves a purpose, right?
It keeps it going. I mean, definitely. There's a lot of stores that have built their whole business on inexpensive, fast fashion. You can be in and out of a fad really quickly, not a problem. And that's part of the fun of it.
And it's a $20 or $30 purchase, and nobody cares that it's out of style the next season. That's
it is
the
like
point.
Disposable fashion. But on the high end, when you start to look at couture, you're really not looking at fad. You're really looking at investment pieces.
Right.
You're looking at things that, at a certain level, it's untouchable because you're talking about things that are the price of a house. I
got things like that in my closet.
And it's $115,000 couture item. These aren't things that you're going to dispose of. These are things that you invest in, and they become part of a wardrobe, for years and years and years. And so they really are inspiration pieces and almost teeter on that border of of art and commerce.
Right,
And
right.
so they are leading the way in that instance. And when you look at trend, versus a fad, a trend is something that's going to build up over time. We always say, I say, look for evolution, not revolution. You're looking for how it's evolving over time. But I think, the designers that are running at this couture level, they have the instinct for it. They know innately, what the consumer is going to be looking for.
And so now if you're an interior designer and you're shopping the showroom, say you're in the D&D or you're at the market in Dallas or wherever you are, when you're shopping the showrooms and your intention is to create a classically designed space. It's probably an expensive space, an investment space for a particular client, and you don't want, their guests to walk in the following year and go, really? So yesterday's design. So are there tips for designers when they're in these showrooms that, they can kind of go by or look for so that they know to not jump on a fad and identify a trend? Is that even possible to give tips on?
I think it is. And it's funny that you asked that. And I say this because I do a lot of talks on trend to the interior design community. And one of the things I always joke with them is I go, I see you rolling your eyes. I know the design community well enough. Many of you are friends of mine. I know the eye rolls when I see them. And what I hear all the time from interior designers is like, well, I don't follow the trends. I mean, I do timeless design. I do classic. I do timeless. If I followed the trends, God forbid, that's
everything would be a
do.
Geometric lattice print.
Right. Or, my clients would still be living with, an avocado refrigerator or mauve wall from the 80s. That's very dated looking. But the truth is we all follow the trends, like it or not. We're all exposed to the trends, like it or not.
I believe that too.
And your clients are certainly impacted by the trends, like it or not.
Right.
So, you need to understand that. And then ultimately, one of the reasons that you would hire an interior designer is because you want the editing. You want beyond the obvious, which is a designer knows three-dimensional space better than any layperson would ever know it. You can't curate a room the way a designer would curate a room by yourself. I don't care how many pins you looked at on Pinterest.
It's the truth.
There's a skill that comes with being a professional. The same way that, I'll go back to my doctor analogy, nothing beats going to a real doctor. You can go on to WebMD or whatever these places are, you can self-diagnose all day long.
Right. And then cry all night because you're sure it's the end of your day on the earth.
Correct. Either that or you misdiagnose yourself and you get really sick. There is no substitute for a professional. So, there's absolutely, good interior designers are always worth the investment because they will bring a level of quality that you wouldn't be able to access otherwise, to the entire scheme, to the entire home and to the entire process. But, can interiors designers use trends to their advantage? Of course. And learning it. And part of it is going to lectures and doing the research and incorporating it. Part of the reason it's so important to interior designers is it gives them a glimpse into what's going to be influencing their clients that their clients might not even know. But when they have that glimpse, they can so much better meet the needs of their clients. They can so much better have an understanding of what is going to be making them happy, be making them feel whatever it is that they're going to feel, because design is emotional and trends play to that emotion. We are influenced by trends because it impacts how we live.
Right.
So understanding the trends makes you a better designer. It doesn't make you a worse designer. It makes you a better designer because you can anticipate the needs of your client before they even know what they want.
And then you come, you're the expert that you're supposedly are because you're in touch and aware and ahead of the curve.
And you have a deeper understanding.
Right.
I think the more you understand what drives trends, the less afraid you become of them.
Mm-hmm. I mean, it's fads that we want to avoid at high-end design, but trends are our friend.
Absolutely. I think that's a great way to put it. Trend is your friend. Yes.
Hey, we have a new catchphrase, me and you. Trend is your friend. That's going to be the topic for your next speech at High Point. Trend is your friend. LuAnn said trend is your friend.
I'm going to use it.
That's awesome. So now here's my other question with that, though. And I wanted to know, for a company like yourself, where I have to imagine that from the time you have the germ of a birth of a product line, whether it's the lines of a furniture line or the patterns in a wall covering line that you are designing or fabric, how does that happen when you're here in 2016 and you're doing your research and your analogies into the trends? And then you're going to design with it in mind, or with it in at least in as a whatever. It's 2 years, isn't it? It's a while before that product is out on the market.
Totally.
Yeah. So is it that you're actually identifying a trend at its true infancy, and what you're like? So, for instance, whatever the trend is now, like we're riding high, and we're probably on the way out of all the whites and the grays, and that whole, I don't know, whatever you want to call it, look, right? So we're kind of finishing that up, and we're still in it. And I'm certainly not dissing any designer that's just putting a beautiful room out like that right now. We all know that's not what I'm doing. But that's been an actual recognized trend, that whole clean, sleek, minimal whites and grays and taupes and softness. And of course, I love it. It's gorgeous. So are you saying to me that while we're sort of riding this out, you personally, you at your company, you're already forecasting and aware and seeing what's coming in 2 or 3 years, and you're designing those so that when we're all of a sudden like, hey, we're in love with this thing now, you've got it out there?
100%.
Unreal.
The way that we do that too is really with transition pieces, so like I said, trends are things that evolve over time. And so we don't want to, have, like we said, okay, this season it's this collection, and then now gray is out. And so next season it's, it's all about, we're forecasting browns. So the next season it's only brown. That wouldn't be good for anybody. And that certainly would not be validating the idea of a trend. So we're going to watch it as it slowly evolves over time. So we're seeing grays get warmer, more taupey. As they get more warm, what's complementary to that? We're seeing brown as a beautiful complement to that. And so we're starting to introduce brown back into the lines again. And maybe, and I'll give you the example with the textile, and maybe we had tons of grays in the line. The next season they go warmer, or the next season we start to do combination products. It's gray with accent colors. And so, as people buy from the collections, they can build on what they already have.
Right. You're not putting them in a position they have to throw the baby out with the bathwater. Like
they
if they
can't. Nobody would invest in that. And that's really not the home furnishings doesn't work that way. No. And my training, as somebody who designs in hotels, certainly doesn't work that way either. These need to be investment pieces. And when you're looking at things like hard surface flooring, whether it's in a hotel or a residence, those are not going to be taken out, potentially for 20 years.
Mm-hmm.
We know people, you put those in, and that needs to live a very long time. So gray is still a good investment because we're going to build on it. It's not just going to be gone, but then eventually it will be gone.
Right. But it'll be over the long arc of maybe a 10-year cycle or something like that. But in the interim, you are introducing things that coordinate and complement and accessorize with it. But so that when we emerge again and the gray is completely gone, like the mauve and the harvest gold and all that left, you are in the midst of the next thing. It's very fascinating, actually. And you're really very brilliant.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
Yeah, I'm very impressed, and it's so interesting. I've never had a conversation with somebody this in depth about this end of the business, and it's a real treat for me. Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. It is quite fascinating, and I think part of what drives my interest in it is I mentioned that I had a degree in surface pattern design, but I also did a minor in psychology. So I sort of was working toward all of my extra courses course, is, just psychology and what makes people tick was always really interesting to me. And I think, part of it is you have that desire to learn about yourself, right? Like what makes you tick. And so forecasting is like right up that alley, of it's anthropology, it's psychology, it's human behavior, what makes us react, what makes us react really with our pocketbook, because at the end of the day, that's what drives consumer trends. We're looking at consumer spending. It's what keeps the economy running, it's what do we choose to spend our money on, and what makes us pull the trigger on those things.
And that's exactly it, because at the end of the day, it's not a hobby. Somebody's got to buy what you're selling.
and you want to use your money wisely. If you're on the home, you want to make sure you're investing your dollars, with a professional, or, you're going to curate pieces, and you want to feel good that those pieces you're spending your dollars on, you're going to be happy with for a really long time.
Yeah. I'm truly, literally very fascinated by it. It's such an interesting thing that you do. And what's funny is we've spent a lot of time talking about it, and, you have so many actual technical things in building your business that you've done, but that's very unique what you do there, that you're a part of the organization that identifies these things, and you take the time out of your business and your company every year to go to this summit. So thanks for sharing all that.
My pleasure. Yeah, it's been, it is really fun, and it is a huge part, as I said, of what informs, our process. And of course, the trends are all over the place, so you can really look at it, when I almost take a funnel approach. We pour all the trends into our funnel, and, what comes out ultimately with the things that I design under my brand is through the lens of Stacy Garcia Company. It really, because it would be, there's too many things going on. So when I do my talks, I'll talk about usually between 6 and 8 trends that we're seeing coming up in the next year or 2 years. But we don't design around every single one of them, because they don't all necessarily make sense in the point of view that I'm designing for.
Right. It's still, you're aware of it, you're identifying it, but you're also, selecting and skewing it to your company and your market and your vision.
Absolutely. And the brand.
And every designer should do the same thing. You know what I mean? Right?
It is what makes the world go round. Yeah, absolutely.
Very cool. So I know that you're going to be at High Point next week. Is this what are you doing a talk on trends next week? Is that what you're doing?
I am. I'm actually really excited to have been asked by ASID to be a presenter at High Point. And what we decided to do was sort of a two-pronged approach to the talk. So they asked me to talk on not only trends, but also a little bit on licensing. Okay. So what I'll be doing is sort of dialing my trend talk down. I'm going to be presenting 4 trends instead of 8. And then I'm going to show beyond the trends and discuss a little bit more in depth sort of how the design community and the retail community can spot a trend and where it comes from, like we talked about a little bit, but I'm going to go into more detail on it. I'm going to present the trends, and then after I present the trends, I'm going to actually give a case study using 3 trends that I forecast a year ago, and showing how I use those trends to create product.
How
through
exciting.
Licensing. Yeah. So I'll be able to show, how we've interpreted those, how we've sort of simmered those into the lens of Stacy Garcia, and then through specific licensing case studies showing various pieces of my furniture collection, textiles, leather, wall covering, across 3 different trends that I had forecast a year ago.
That's so
So hopefully you can come.
You know what? Like, listen to me. I'm like, yeah. Oh, I'm going to actually be in Las Vegas next weekend, which I'm also very happy to be doing, but I am a little sorry not to be able to see and hear that. And anybody that's listening to this, because I'm going to put your show up right at the beginning of High Point so that they will get this information. And if they're down there and they've listened to the show, they'll be able to definitely know that they can follow right up with seeing your talk. That's so cool. I love that you know what I love about it is I love the accountability that you're being transparent with. I think that's very, very smart on your part, and that you like, this is what I said last year and this is what happened, like here it is, like that's awesome.
Thank you.
Very cool. So okay, so I'm like taking so much of your time, but before you go, I would love for you to tell us about the two new things that I know are on your horizon. One has already been launched, the other is in the process, because everybody knows that you have for the 20 plus years been a absolute leader in the hospitality industry with your textiles, your carpet, your wall covering, your furniture, your lighting, but you're doing two new things now. Tell us about those before you go back to work.
Okay, great. Thank you so much. So the first is that I launched a new brand called Stacy Garcia New York. I launched that a year ago at DIFA, actually, in New York, where I did a table to show off this whole new concept. And Stacy Garcia New York is our luxury to the trade brand. And we launched it with a high-end wall covering line that's available through York Wall Coverings. So that's a licensed product, and it's in showrooms nationally as well. And so if you're interested in that, you can go to my website, which is a separate site. It's www.stacygarcianewyork.com. There's no E in Stacy, just in case.
Okay.
And actually, there's a showroom list on there if you're interested in finding where to get that or even to view the product.
And this is to the trade, high-end luxury to the trade.
It's to the trade, exactly. And so that's available. That would be purchased through York Wall Coverings. And I know many of our clients are on book programs and already, have access to that.
Very cool.
And then the second thing we did was we just launched 8 of our furniture pieces that they're being manufactured by D-Style Allen Copley, and those are residential pieces as well. And so they're pretty outrageous. I have prototypes that actually just landed in my office literally 2 days ago. And so I'm just so tickled. I'm sitting next to this dresser drawer. It has soft closed, dovetail hinging on the drawers. And leather front faces. And we used actually leathers from our new collection with Townsend. And that's going to go up onto the live site as well. So those leathers aren't even ready yet, but those will be launching under the Stacy Garcia New York label as well. And we've incorporated them into some of the furniture. So I'm just so excited to be able to begin to launch this product to the trade, show them what we've got and hopefully have them love what we're doing.
And so this is just so I make sure that people are understanding that this is a residential line as opposed to a commercial line that designers can now specify for their projects.
Yep, one at a time. Exactly.
Terrific. I love it.
One at a time, and the furniture pieces are actually live as we speak. So
nice.
That is ready to go. And so I'm excited for people to see that. And then the other new brand that you were asking about is called Stay by Stacy Garcia. And that's really, in its infancy right now, but it is in planning phases. We're beginning to design product. And that whole idea, sort of coming soon, but that is the whole idea of using the expertise that I have as a hospitality product designer and really developing product for the consumer. So it's a retail concept that will be available direct to consumer at retail. The whole idea is, stay comfortable, stay, in your home, really treat it as a resort. And then my tagline, which has always been, is stay inspired, just to utilize that as a way to be inspired, be able to bring these pieces home, feel like you're surrounded, in a resort type of environment and never have to leave the comfort of your home. So that's what that's all about. So I'm excited, that's coming soon.
It's pretty extraordinary, actually, that you have so many things going on and you are doing so well at all of them, because it's one thing to have an idea. It's another thing to execute it. It's another thing to do it well. And then here you have 3 completely different, focuses, not that they're completely different. Obviously they're related, but it's 3 different businesses, 3 different markets. And, I'm in awe.
Thank you so much. Well, I keep, just reinventing and, a lot of it is, for myself, it's sort of, what would I want to live with? Knowing what I know, knowing that I have all the access, to sort of the world's manufacturing capabilities, because I've been doing it as long as I have. And, what are those things that I would want to have access to? And yes, there are things that, I would need an interior designer's guidance, because they are more investment pieces, like we talked about. I wouldn't necessarily feel comfortable going, let me order this online, but I would want to know that, the coffee table, which is overscaled, fits into my space. And so, there are things that should be purchased through the trade. But there are other things that, I might want to go to a retailer and buy a bedding ensemble. I might want to do that for my guest room, or even, as an extra set of sheets. And how do you layer a bed so that you really feel like you're enveloped in luxury, without having to spend a small fortune on it? So I think that there are many consumers, even in the highest end of houses that do a high low. I mean, that's how people live today. That's the reality.
It's true. And it's pretty, savvy on your part to recognize that, because I think you're exactly, I don't think it, I know you're exactly right. The highest level consumer still does have certain things off the rack that they went into, Bloomingdale's or Saks or, Marshalls or whatever and purchased. But that doesn't mean they don't want it to be quality. That doesn't mean, that they don't want it to feel and look good and be well made. It just means that not everything is going to be specified from a trade only source that's just, super, super expensive. So you're identifying that, like you just used the words, everybody does a combination of high low. I've never heard that before. Of course, I understand the concept, but I've never heard it said that way before. It's pretty smart.
Yeah, and people have access to information. They are doing Pinterest and they are looking at house and they are doing their research and they have their own ideas and they have a lot more confidence than people did in the past, about wanting to curate their homes. And many of them know that they need the help of a professional, and they hire it and they spend the money wisely, because it's a great investment. But then they put their finishing touches. At the end of the day, they end up in Home Goods or Bed Bath & Beyond or Kohl's or wherever it is that they happen to be, because there are things that they're not going to spend a fortune on. They're just
right.
They're smart consumers.
Right. And even for designers out there listening, it's not, the conversation doesn't even have to be taken from the standpoint of, she's encouraging people to do something on their own. How about we're encouraging you to create your own thing of line that you could be putting into a Bed Bath & Beyond? I mean, this is the both ends of the conversation. We're speaking to you out there saying, hey, be inspired by what Stacy's doing. This is so cool.
Sure. And honor that part of your client, because that's the reality. And so, rather than being afraid of it, it's one of those things that you say, you know what, I understand it. And when I understand it, it's not scary because I understand my place in the process.
Right.
And the interior designer, has a hugely important place, and not just in luxury, multi-million-dollar homes. There are lots of smaller sort of mid-level homes that need the help, hire the help, and are excited to spend the money because it's an investment, not because, they have millions and millions of dollars, but because they understand, this is a place I want to invest my money. I want to have beautiful window treatments. I want to make sure that the furniture is the right scale, or that I'm not picking something that looks, that's going to be dated. So they do need the help of
absolutely at every level, exactly as you said, from the regular Joe on regular, Smith Street or whatever it is, because again, everybody's entitled to live in a beautiful space that makes them happy. Yeah,
absolutely.
That's really, really terrific. Stacy, I am I'm just so impressed by you, and I'm so grateful for having met you. You're so warm and open, and I feel like I've known you 100 years, and I just I'm particularly inspired by you, and I am 100% certain that you've inspired people out there with all the information that you shared, and just the story of how it happened, and how at this stage of your career, you're reinventing again, and you're digging in again, and you're figuring out a new, better way to do another part of the marketplace. So, thank you.
Oh, and right back at you. I mean, you've been wonderful to speak to, and I see why you already having this tremendous success. So I'm excited for it to air, and I look forward to more to come. So thank you so much as well.
Yeah, thank you. Have a great day.
You too, LuAnn. Take care.
Okay. So there's a few things here. The first is I have to tell you that Stacy and I spoke for an entire hour before I hit record. She's just infectious. She's brilliant. She's dynamic, inquisitive, and accomplished. And I'm her new number one fan. But that's pretty obvious, right? Are you 2, 3, and 4? I won't believe it if you tell me you're not. And I just love how the show conversation went, finding out about her personal journey to becoming the business empire that she is today. The second thing I want to share with you is I'm pretty sure I'm a trend spotter too, just like Stacy. The emerging trend I'm spotting is in the guests on my podcast. The trend is that there are a string of mega business superstars who are spending time with all of us here, and they have common traits. They seize opportunities. They trust their voice, their goddess, and they are never satisfied. They keep reinventing themselves and creating new products, services, and businesses. So, my question is, are you doing this too? Tell me you are going to tune into your voice. Tell me you are creating not just beautiful rooms, but a beautiful business that is profitable and a business that challenges and fulfills you and requires you to be and to do your best. So, lastly, if you are in High Point this week, please don't miss Stacy's presentation. And be sure to say hi to her for me. And you please tell her that you heard about her whole fascinating story here on the podcast. Thanks so much for joining me. Have a great day. My great thanks to the sponsor of our podcast, Cravat Inc., featuring CuratedCravat.com. CuratedCravat.com is your go-to resource for the finest in lighting, bedding, pillows, rugs, and so much more. You simply must visit CuratedCravat.com to see what I'm talking about. From the fabulous inspiration rooms curated by leading interior designers to the simplicity of the ordering process. Remember, design, click, delivered. I know you will be as big a fan as I am. See for yourself at CuratedCravat.com. Thank you for joining me again today for another episode of A Well-Designed Business. This podcast is a production of WindowWorks in Livingston, New Jersey, your trade resource for custom window treatments and awnings. Learn more about WindowWorks at www.windowworks-nj.com. All of our music is original music by Room 2 Productions. Please contact us if you want to learn more about original music for your business or your events.